بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we are given tawfiq to start an introduction to logic or Mantiq. And before I go into the main topic, I want to say that in our 4-year program, in our curriculum, we have 6 units on Mantiq, on logic. We will study logic, inshallah, in 2 levels. One is introductory, which is this one, and the idea is that you understand the main framework, the main concepts, what is Mantiq about, and then in the second, inshallah, stage, we will go into a more detailed discussion. Of course, in Hawzah, they study more, especially if you want to become very familiar with philosophy, you may need more. But I think for our purpose, inshallah, if you understand these 2 levels, properly, would be enough. And of course, inshallah, in future you can continue. So this is very basic Mantiq, salam alaikum, that inshallah we are going to study. And inshallah after that, we would have the second stage. For Mantiq, in the Hawzahs, we have different books that we use as textbooks. In the past, they used to study a book which was in Jam'ul Muqaddamat called Al-Kubra fil Mantiq. I don't know if you have seen Jam'ul Muqaddamat. It's a book that has different sections, and also some books are on the margin. And it's okay. Yes, they checked. Thank you very much. So that's a book that was taking at least a year. It starts with Sharh Amsale, then Sarf Amir, Tasrif, Sharh Tasrif, and then Awamil fil Nahw, Hidayah, Samadiyya, and also Adab al-Muta'allimin, Kubra fil Mantiq on margins. It was a nice collection called Jam'ul Muqaddamat. So Al-Kubra fil Mantiq was the first book on logic, and then after that they used to study Hashiyah by Mullah Abdullah Yazdi, and then after that Sharh Shamsiyya, and then other books like Mantiq of Manzuma, and then Mantiq of Shifa by Ibn Sina. Gradually they started using other books. For example, I studied, in addition to Kubra fil Mantiq, Khulasatul Mantiq in our school in Qom. We had also Khulasatul Mantiq by Sheikh Abdul Hadi Fadli. And then instead of Hashimullah Abdullah, we studied Mantiq by Muzaffar, which is now a very established textbook. And some places then they started now using new textbooks produced in Qom. So there are different texts that they use. I thought what we can do is to study Ayatollah Mutahhari's Introduction to Logic, because we don't want this to take too long, so that we can have enough time for the second stage. And also, this is a very well-known introduction. You know, Ayatollah Mutahhari has Introduction to Logic, Philosophy, one volume, in Farsi, of course. Then Introduction to Fiqh and Usul al-Fiqh, Introduction to Akhlaq and Kalam and Irfan. So 3 volumes. They were translated to English and published separately. Then Islamic College, some years back, published them together as Understanding Islamic Sciences. But this didn't have logic. Okay? The work had logic, but the collection didn't have logic as a part. So now, inshallah, soon they are going to release the new edition of Understanding Islamic Sciences with logic. But there is a file, PDF file, that inshallah you will be given by the office that you can use for Introduction to Logic by Ayatollah Mutahhari. It's also available in different languages, Farsi, Arabic, Urdu. So you can also use it in another language. These lectures by Ayatollah Mutahhari were given in Tehran University in the Faculty of Theology, Ilahiyat, before revolution. You know, he had to, for some personal reasons, and also for finding Tehran a very good place for work, he had to leave Hawzah and go to Tehran. And then he was admitted as a member of faculty in Tehran University. Of course, he was very, very knowledgeable, but because at that time, you know, to have an alim, you know, in the university without having, you know, PhD was not easy. But because they recognized his knowledge, they accepted him, and he was teaching there. But he was teaching also undergraduate students, and this was part of a course that he had to introduce Islamic sciences to the university students. Later they worked on it and became a book. Okay, so this is about the text that we are going to use. But let's talk about Mantiq. What is Mantiq or logic? You know that we always need to understand new things and learn new things. Or after having some experience of realizing our mistakes, we want to revisit the things that we seem to know. But we want to make sure whether we know them or not. So as a child, as an unexperienced child, for example, you want to know new things. But as a mature person, you want also to make sure that what you think you know is correct. And when you become, you know, maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, you start doubting many things because you realize that some of the judgments that you had were mistaken. So thinking, putting what we know together in order to understand what we don't know, or being to investigate the process that we had for coming to certain conclusions is a constant concern of human beings. Whether you study logic or not, there is a mechanism for your mind, and that's logic. So logic is not something totally new. It's not like, for example, a language that you learn. Even your mother tongue, you have to learn. Yeah? Even your mother tongue, you have to learn. But logic is not like a language that you learn. Logic is the way our mind functions. The reason we study this is because we want to do it in a conscious way. This is a very important point. There are things that you may do it naturally, automatically, but not consciously and deliberately. And therefore you may make mistakes. So, logicians, which are normally philosophers in the history, they started reflecting on the way we understand things, on the way we form definitions or arguments. Try to see what are the possibilities of mistakes getting into our thinking, and to warn us in advance that this might happen, so that you are doing all this consciously. I remember my teacher used to tell me, this is many, many years ago, that a person got lessons on logic, on Mantiq. And when it finished, the teacher said, now you go out to the market, to the streets, and see how much people use logic. He went out and after some time came back and said, they don't use logic. They never said tasawwur, tasdiq, nisab arba'a, qiyas, aks mustawi, aks naqis, this terminology. It seems that people don't need and don't use logic. So he said, you have to study again. So he studied again in a deeper way. And then said, now you go and check. And this time, he came back and said, everything they do is logic, but they don't know the terminology. They don't know the requirements in a very explicit way. Otherwise, logic is the way they think and they argue. So, you might first think that this is something totally strange or new, but inshallah, if you really grasp it, you realize it is what we always do. But now we want to do it consciously. This is very important. You know, even with respect to your mother tongue, although you learn it, but because you don't learn it consciously, there is a great chance that you may make mistakes. Imagine you are an English-speaking person who has not studied English grammar, or Arabic-speaking people who has not studied Arabic grammar. Maybe 70%, 80% you speak all right, or you write all right, but there can be mistakes. I have seen people, for example, because Arabic is my second language and I have been involved in Arabic grammar for many years, so I see Arabs speaking Arabic, but they make mistakes sometimes. Okay? And it's interesting that mistakes that native make and mistakes that people who learn a language make might be different. Even mistakes that people who have the same original language, for example, if Iranians learn Arabic, they may make common mistakes. If English people speak Arabic, they may make common mistakes. But anyway, even people who have been brought up in an Arabic-speaking environment, they may make mistakes. This is why we all go to a school and we learn grammar of our own language. Okay? So that we don't make mistakes. Of course, you appreciate that just studying grammar would not stop making mistakes. It's a matter of also practicing and implementing. So, with respect to logic, is the same. We all naturally follow logic. But if you don't know logic and don't practice logic, then there is a great chance that you may make mistakes. Many times when we reflect on the way that people argue, we can see there are some gaps in argument. There are some gaps. So, the science of logic is a science, a discipline developed. It's not invented, it's not created. It's developed out of reflection on human thinking and reasoning. In order to save us from making mistakes in our thinking. There is a very famous sentence that you can memorize. It's easy to memorize in Arabic. You find it in many books, and Ayatollah Mutahhari also mentions this. They say, آلة قانونية تعصم مراعاتها الذهن عن الخطأ في الفكر. آلة قانونية تعصم مراعاتها الذهن عن الخطأ في الفكر. This is the definition of Mantiq. Mantiq is ala. What is ala? Alam is a tool. Tool, yeah? Alam is tool. Mantiq is a tool. But what type of tool? It's not like a screwdriver. It's alatun qanuniyatun. Means it's a tool which comprises, which involves certain rules. Yeah? There are rules. And if you observe this tool, which is a set of rules, it will protect your mind from mistakes in thinking. Ta'asimu. Ta'asimu means saves and protects. Yeah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet, وَاللَّهُ يَعْصِمُكَ مِنَ النَّاسِ. Yeah? Ya ayyuhar rasul, balligh ma unzila ilayk. At the end said, وَاللَّهُ يَعْصِمُكَ. God saves you from people. Means those who are against this message will not be able to harm you and the message. So, آلة قانونية تعصم. It's a tool which is a matter of some rules that protects mura'atuha, its observance. If you observe it, it would protect al-dhihn, your mind. Dhihn means mind. Anil khata, from mistake. Fil fikr, in thinking. So, by having knowledge of Mantiq and practicing and implementing it, you will be saved from what? From mistakes in thinking. Now we have to explain what is thinking, what is fikr. And also we have to explain why they say it is ala, it's a tool. First, let me explain the second. We study different sciences, especially as Islamic sciences. We study different subjects. There's a good discussion by Ayatollah Mutahhari about what do we mean when we say Islamic sciences. Okay, so actually the first lesson of this collection is about this. Do we mean by Islamic sciences something developed by Muslims or something which is introduced by Prophet? What? The brief answer is, we mean by Islamic sciences something which is developed by Muslims in order to understand Islam, which is based on the Quran and Sunnah and reason. So any science that is helping in understanding Islamic concepts and teachings, this is Islamic science. But when you go closer, you find some of these sciences which are developed and we study them in, for example, Hawzah, are not directly related to Islamic teachings. For example, some are not like fiqh or tafsir or akhlaq. Some are like sarf and nahf and balagha and mantiq. Yeah? Morphology, syntax, rhetorics, logic. If you study them, you don't see direct influence of Islam. But why Muslims developed them, or maybe sometimes they took it from other cultures and developed it, because they found them useful tools for understanding Islam. Okay? So, Mantiq is one of those sciences which has practical significance for us. Something which is not directly telling us something about Quran or about Islam or about Allah or about us, about akhlaq. Yeah? It's very abstract and very neutral, but it's a tool that you can learn and then benefit from this in every science. If you want to do reasoning in fiqh, you need mantiq. If you want to do reasoning in akhlaq, you need mantiq. And of course, you need it very much in philosophy and theology. But indeed, everywhere you need mantiq. Even in a daily conversation, you need mantiq. Okay? So now you realize why we say alatun. So it's one of those sciences which are not meant for understanding religion or the world directly. They are understood as helpful tools and instruments. Okay, like language. Can you understand yourself or God through language? No, language can be used by religious people, atheists, by everyone. But it's a good tool. So, this is one point. The other point, what is fikr? Because we said, آلة قانونية تعصم مراعاتها الذهن عن الخطأ في الفكر. This is a tool which is a set of rules that if you observe, it would protect your mind from making mistakes in thinking. So what is fikr? Al-fikr has been defined in different ways, but they are all similar. For example, some have said الفكر حركة من المبادئ ومن المبادئ إلى المراد. Of course, because it's a poem by Hajia Sabjawari, we say Muradi, otherwise Murade. But in poem, we make it Muradi. حركة إلى المبادئ ومن المبادئ إلى المراد, means إلى المراد. What does it mean? It means that whenever you want to think, you have one issue that's concerning you. For example, you want to know whether this world is created or not. So you have a question. Yeah, it's a question. You want to know the reality about this. Is this a true statement that world is created or not? Yeah? So this is what you want to know. If you want to know this, you have to think. So what do you do when you want to think about a question? When you are faced with a question, you analyze that question into a subject and predicate, and then go back to your mind and find statements that involve these subject and predicate, and try to see, do you have anything already known to you that related to them, and put them together and form a kind of argument. Okay? So, you have a question, go back to the information that you have, form an argument, and come to a conclusion that either that initial question was correct in an affirmative way or in a negative way. Either world is created is true or world is not created is true. So, murad means what we want to understand. The same thing after we understand is called conclusion, natija. So remember this always in future, when we will talk about syllogism or qiyas, we will always use this. First you have murad or matlub, means something that you want to understand, and then after you form the argument and you prove it, it becomes conclusion, natija, the result. Okay? So, what is fiqh? Fiqh is the motion, the movement of mind from question into the stored facts and ideas that we have, and then going back to it in order to understand it or prove it. This is fiqh. Okay? So it's a transition or motion of mind between what we know and what we don't know till we find. And sometimes maybe your mind is not able to find the answer because you don't have enough information. You don't know how to come to a conclusion. It remains till someone maybe teaches you something or a new idea comes to your mind. So now you understand fiqh, thinking, reasoning. So if I ask you, what's the definition of logic? What do you say? You say, آلة قانونية تعصم مراعاتها الذهن عن الخطأ في الفكر. Okay? And in English you can say, it's a tool which involves certain rules that if we follow, they would save us from making mistakes in the process of thinking. And what is thinking? Thinking is to be faced with a question and then going back to our data and our information and try to form a definition or a kind of argument to understand that question. I will explain later why I say definition or argument. Inshallah, I will explain later. What's the benefit of logic? After understanding the definition, what's the benefit? I think the benefit is obvious, because in the definition we also mentioned the benefit. The benefit is to be able to protect ourselves from making mistakes and to strengthen our power of arguing and reasoning. One part of Mantiq is to study, for example, different types of arguments and also different types of fallacies. You know fallacies? Mughalatat. There are certain fallacies, certain ways of making mistakes that if you are aware, you can protect yourself. So we know the benefit. The next question is, what is the subject matter of logic or mantiq? Subject matter is what we call mawdu'. Ma huwa mawdu'ul mantiq? What is the subject matter for logic? If I ask you, what is the subject matter of medicine? You can tell me. In medicine, we study conditions of body with respect to health and illness. Yeah? This is the definition of medicine. What is the definition, for example, of morphology? We say in morphology, we study the way to form words as they are. And in syntax, we study the functions of words in sentence and in phrases. So anyway, any science has a subject matter. Ayatollah Mutahhari has a discussion here that is very brief, but in the books on usul al-fiqh, especially the books about Dars Kharij, sometimes there are tens of pages about this idea. What is subject matter? And do we need subject matter for every science? Normally they say, I say it very briefly, like the text, because I don't think we need to discuss it too much. A technical definition for subject matter is this. Al-mawdu' ma yubhathu fi ذاك العلم عن عوارضه الذاتية. So موضوع كل علم ما يبحث فيه عن عوارضه الذاتية. The subject matter for every discipline or science is what you study in that science, its conditions, its predicates, which are essential for it. And then there are lots of discussion about what do we mean by essential properties. To make it very simple, he mentions one example. Human beings, as you know, are part of a larger family of animals. Okay? If we want to study only human beings, if there is a science that is going to study human beings, what type of things we have to study in this science? Everything that is not related to human beings is certainly excluded. Okay? Anything which is not related to human beings is excluded. But in a science which is developed for understanding human beings, like anthropology, should we study everything that relates to human beings or only some of them? For example, there are things that relate to human beings, but also they are true about every living beings. So we should set them aside. Or there are things that relate to human beings, but they are for every animal. We should leave them aside. Because in a science which is developed for understanding humanity, we should only study something which is related to humanity primarily and essentially. Not something which is for a larger concept like animal or living being or being. Do you understand the point? So, this is why they say the subject matter for every science is something that you study its properties, its characteristics, its conditions, but not every characteristic and property and condition. Those which are essential, dhati, those which are directly and primarily related to it. Okay? Otherwise, will be something about another science. So, this is one point. The second point is, does every science need to have a subject matter? Most of them say yes. Most of scholars say the subject matter is needed, and that's the center for all propositions, all sentences and statements made in that science are built around that subject matter. Some say we may have subject matter, or we may have something else that brings all these statements together. Can you guess what can be the other thing? How a science is formed. You know, in every science you have hundreds or thousands of propositions, statements. Why you consider them as one unit? Why you don't confuse these sciences? Some say because every science has a particular subject matter. Some say you may have a particular subject matter or something else. What can be that else? Function or benefit. They say every science can be developed for a purpose, and anything that is useful for reaching that is studied in that. So this is a technical discussion, and Ayatollah Mutahhari says, but we can ask further, what is common between these scattered propositions that make them able to contribute to the same purpose? It must be because they are related to the same subject matter. Anyway, the idea that most of our scholars have accepted, and Ayatollah Mutahhari accepted, is that every science or discipline needs a subject matter. So the question is, what's the subject matter of logic or Mantiq? What's the subject matter? Here we say the subject matter of logic are actually two, because logic has two major parts. I told you, in thinking we may have definition or we may have argument. That's because of this. The subject matter of Mantiq is either mu'arrif or hujjah. Inshallah, if you remember, as I tell you, it will help you a lot in future. I try to be very clear, and I hope you remember in the same way. So, subject matter of logic is either mu'arrif or hujjah. Mu'arrif comes from ma'rifah. Yeah? Ma'rifah means knowledge, understanding. Mu'arrif is from bab taf'il. Arrafa yu'arrifu ta'rif means to introduce, to make something known. Mu'arrif means something that makes another thing known. In Iran, if you want to get, for example, admitted in Hawzah, they say you need to bring letters from two mu'arrif. Two referees here, referee, or say two letters of recommendation from referees. There we say mu'arrif, means someone that introduces you and recommends you, mu'arrif. So, one aspect of logic is about definitions. And inshallah we will have lots of discussion about definition. What is definition? What are types of definitions? What are the requirements for proper definitions? We will have very good discussions. So that's one part of Mantiq, mu'arrif, because we want to know how to define notions, conceptions. For example, what is a human being? What's the definition of human being? You say, al-insanu haywanun natiq. There is jins, there is fast. Even jins can be analyzed. For example, instead of saying haywanun natiq, you can say jismun namin hassasun mutaharrikun bil irada natiq. So we'll study inshallah all these things. So one part of Mantiq is about definitions. And that is called ta'rifat, al-hudud. What, for example, Jurjani, one of Muslim scholars, has a book about definitions, al-hudud wa ta'rifat. So about how to define things, how to define concepts, how to define, sciences, all these things. Another part of Mantiq is hujjah. And that is argument, reasoning. Because we also should be able to argue and reason. Because in the process of thinking, sometimes we have a question and we want to understand that question. So sometimes you want to define a concept, sometimes you want to evaluate a statement. If you want to define a concept, you use definition. If you want to verify a claim that put forward as a statement, you need argument. Hujjat is an argument, is a proof. Mu'arrif is a definition. In order to make it even clearer, we need to talk a little bit about knowledge. And this is the last, I think, part for today. What is knowledge? Muslim scholars study knowledge in different sciences, especially in philosophy. We have lots of discussion about knowledge. What is knowledge? Briefly here, we say knowledge is one of the two types. This part is not in the book. Ayatollah Mutahhari has mentioned it in other books. There are two types of knowledge. One type of knowledge is what we call al-ilm al-huduri. That is knowledge by presence. Al-ilm al-huduri, knowledge by presence. What does it mean, knowledge by presence? You may say, can we have knowledge by absence? No, it's not opposite to knowledge by absence. It's opposite to conceptual knowledge, opposite to al-ilm al-husuli. Al-ilm al-huduri, or knowledge by presence, is when what is known is present for the knower. What is known is present for the knower. Al-ma'lum بنفسه حاضر لدى العالم. For example, your knowledge of yourself. It can be knowledge by presence. Or when you are happy or sad, your understanding of your happiness is direct, because your happiness is present for you. Yeah? But conceptual knowledge, or al-ilm al-husuli, is when an image of what is known is present for the knower. حصول صورة المعلوم لدى العالم. حصول صورة المعلوم لدى العالم. So alim, the knower, does not know directly what is known. There is something which occurs between the knower and the known. And that is a mental image. You know, philosophers tell us, and you can easily accept because it's not very complicated. Maybe without hearing this, you think another way, but as soon as you hear, you realize. Right now that I am seeing you, even when I am seeing you, not when I am thinking about someone else who is absent. No, even when I am seeing you and you are present in this room, my knowledge of you is not direct. Because you are not present for my soul. An image of you through seeing you is formed in my soul. And that image is like a mirror that reflects you for me. And this is why there can be mistakes. Because maybe that image in my mind would not 100% correspond to you. You know, there are people who have problems, they see everything double. Yeah? So, do we have 2 persons outside? No, there's 1 person, but they see 2. Or when you put half of the pen in a glass of water and the other half is outside, you see the pen is bending. Is the pen bending? No, but the image that you have reflects pen as something bending. Why? Because I don't have direct knowledge about external objects. But this is different from my knowledge of my own happiness or sadness, or my knowledge about my own reality. Do you understand? So, al-ilm al-husuli is through mental image of what is known. And inshallah, in philosophy, you study this, that they say actually what is primarily known is the image, and what is accidentally and secondarily known, the external object. Al-ma'lumu bil-dhat, what is primarily known is that image in my mind. What is secondarily known is that external object. What is truth? Correspondence between the mental image and the external object. That is the truth. If they correspond, it means I have true knowledge. Yeah? Otherwise, it's not really knowledge. I just think I know. So, now you realize there are two types of knowledge. Then, when it comes to our knowledge, we have another classification. Sometimes our knowledge is in the form of tasawwur, and sometimes it's in the form of tasdeeq. It is said that the very first person who noticed clearly and elaborated on this distinction was Farabi, Abu Nasr al-Farabi, who is known as Al-Muallim al-Thani. You know, because they call Aristotle the first teacher, because Aristotle was a master of all important sciences of his time. And actually, as far as we know, he's the first person to develop the science of logic. Before that also there were, people who were using logic and talking about maybe even logic, but he put it together as a discipline. In Islam, we have Farabi, and they call him Muallim al-Thani, means after Aristotle. He was a person who was a great philosopher, but at the same time expert in many other sciences. Anyway, Farabi is the first person on record who mentioned this distinction between tasawwur and tasdeeq. Sometimes we only have a concept. Tasawwur means conception. Okay? It doesn't say whether it exists or doesn't exist, whether it is right or wrong, true or false, cold or hot. Just a conception. For example, you can imagine a person, known or unknown. You can imagine an animal. For example, I say concept of flower, concept of rose flower, sunflower, concept of elephant. Even I can tell you, think of an elephant with two heads. You can think about it. Because it doesn't say whether it exists or not. It's just a concept. If you know the meaning, you can conceive of it. But you don't say it's good or bad or right or wrong or true or false. No judgment, whether about truth or falsity or about moral judgment. No, just a concept, you conceive of this concept. But tasdeeq means affirmation. Tasdeeq is when you judge. For example, if you say, this book is good, this flower is beautiful, there is one person in the room. Whether it's true or false, that's another issue, but it's called tasdeeq because it's a statement. It involves a judgment. You say something about it even in your maybe heart or mind, maybe you don't speak about it, but means your mind is making a judgment. A is B or A is not B. Whether you say is B or is not B, you are making a judgment. It's not that only when you say A is B, you are making a judgment. Yeah, even if you say A is not B, you are making a judgment. But when you only think about A or B, or even when you think whether A is B or not, still it's not a judgment. Yeah? So, for tasdeeq, how many things should be there at least? No, one person is needed for both tasawwur and tasdeeq. But if you want to have tasdeeq, you need 4 things at least. Al-mudu, which is the subject. Al-mahmul, the predicate. Then, thinking of the relation between the two. And the 4th is the judgment. We say al-mawdu, al-mahmul, al-nisbatul hukmiyya, al-hukm. When you say A is B, so you have to have A in your mind, B in your mind, then you think about whether A is B or not, the relation between A and B, and then if you are able to make up your mind, you say A is B or A is not B, doesn't make difference. Both of them are tasdeeq. But you have to make a judgment, hukm, a verdict. It's a mental verdict. Okay? So, our knowledge is either tasawwur or tasdeeq. Is it clear? Yes. Mahmul is predicate. Subject and predicate. For example, you say, this person is kind. Okay? This person is subject. Kind is predicate. Is mahmul. Then we have 2 types of tasawwur and 2 types of tasdeeq. I only mention, but I leave it for the next session because I don't want to give too much for the first session. Each of tasawwur and tasdeeq can have one of the 2 types. Either they are self-evident, we call them badihi or dharuri. They are self-evident, means they don't need any explanation or any argument. Or they are nadhari, means they need to be explained or argued for. It's not something obvious or self-evident. Inshallah, next session I will explain these 2 types of tasawwur and tasdeeq. Then we will see how they relate to the issue of mu'arraf and hujjat. Because we will say that mu'arraf is about using self-evident tasawwurat to understand those tasawwurat which are not self-evident, and hujjat is to use self-evident tasdiqat to understand those tasdiqat which are not self-evident. Inshallah, we will talk about it in the next session. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.